Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to uncover the invisible scaffolding that literally keeps our entire society from collapsing into relatable chaos. You know, we so often think of government just as a stage for political theater, right? A place of endless debates and flashy headlines. But beneath all of that noise, there's a silent engine. So we're going to peel back the layers and really look at the fundamental machinery of governance, how it's built, why it works, and what it actually does every single day to keep your life functioning smoothly.
All right, Section 1, Escaping Relatable Chaos and Visualizing exactly what that looks like. To truly grasp why any of this machinery actually matters, let's do a quick, kind of visceral thought experiment. I want you to imagine waking up tomorrow morning and the social contract, that unwritten agreement that keeps all of our communities functional, has just completely evaporated. What happens next? Imagine your morning commute with absolutely no traffic lights to arbitrate the intersections. Imagine sitting down for breakfast, but there is zero food safety standards, meaning you are personally responsible for testing every single calorie for toxins. In a scenario like this, every single social boundary, from your property rights to how fast you're allowed to drive, has to be personally negotiated by you.
That brings us to a stark, absolutely massive contrast between relatable chaos and peaceful coexistence. Relatable chaos is an exhausting state of constant individual negotiation. It is filled with dangerous friction, where disputes basically just end up being settled by raw force. But peaceful coexistence, that is driven by authorized collective management. It brings stability. It brings predictable rules. This contrast right here brilliantly shows why we desperately need an escape from the draining burden of personal bargaining. We need a system that makes peaceful coexistence a deliberate structural certainty, not just some fleeting, lucky accident. Moving on to Section 2, the social machinery, or what we can think of as the silent engine.
To escape all that chaos we just talked about, we have to rely on something way more profound than just individual leaders. Think of the government as a remarkably complex, interconnected blueprint. It's not just politicians. It is the silent engine humming in the background of our lives, taking on the intensely complex logistics of territory, leadership, and resources. Because this machinery is authorized to actually make and enforce laws, it completely lifts the burden off your shoulders. You don't have to negotiate every single social interaction you have today. It operates in the background specifically so that you can live peacefully and just pursue your own private interests.
So how do we actually define this force? Well, government is essentially the fundamental institution or group of people authorized to make laws, enforce rules, and manage the affairs of a country or community. It's not just a fancy building in a capital city, and it's not just one person. It is the absolutely essential architecture of civil order. It's kind of like the operating system that transforms a random, disparate group of people into a cohesive, thriving state.
Okay, Section 3, the 6 pillars of the state and the true nature of governance. How does this massive machine stay upright without totally collapsing under its own weight? Well, it relies on 6 foundational pillars. First, you've got authority, the legal right to actually enforce laws. Then, sovereignty, protecting the state from outside foreign control. You have legitimacy, which is what drives voluntary compliance from the people. Organization, which divides the state into functional working arms. Permanence, and finally, public service, the core mandate to actually serve the people. Together, these 6 pillars establish the state as a reliable working system rather than just a random collection of individuals holding on to power.
Let's zoom in on one of those pillars for a second, because it affects us deeply. Permanence. Permanence is the continuous existence of the institution, completely regardless of who happens to be in charge today. Think about why that matters so much. Politicians have very fragile, finite lifespans, both biologically and electorally. But the institution itself, it remains. And that provides a huge amount of psychological relief. It means the system is literally designed to endure. It ensures the courts stay open, the infrastructure keeps running, and the borders stay protected, even during times of intense political transition or national grief.
Which brings us to Section 4, the 3 arms of power and its tripartite architecture.
Now, handing over all that power we just discussed comes with a pretty massive risk, right? Tyranny. To stop the engine from seizing up or overheating, the machinery uses what we call a tripartite architecture. Think of it like a 3-legged stool of power. First up, the legislature. They operate as the assembly hall of the people to make the laws. Second, the executive, led by presidents or prime ministers to actually implement and enforce those laws. And third, the judiciary, acting as the independent final arbiter to interpret the laws. By meticulously dividing power across these 3 specific branches, the system creates an existential safeguard. It ensures the people drafting the laws aren't the ones unilaterally enforcing them,
which brilliantly prevents a slide into absolute rule.
All right, Section 5, operational domains, or the 5 scopes of action.
So with that structure in place, what does the government actually do all day? It executes its duties across 5 holistic areas. We have the political domain, maintaining order and national security; the economic domain, acting as the machinery of growth through things like trade regulation; the social domain, focusing on real human outcomes like education and healthcare; the legal domain, administering impartial justice; and the environmental domain, acting as a collective shield to protect our natural resources.
And let's bring this right back to you. Why should you care? Because by silently operating in the background across all these domains, the government prevents friction. It prevents security friction so you can sleep safely at night. It prevents infrastructural friction so you don't have to personally pave the road leading out of your neighborhood. It prevents inequality friction, arbitrary legal friction, and resource friction. You literally don't have to test your own tap water for toxins because this machinery is already arbitrating those complex logistics on your behalf.
Finally, Section 6, the secret ingredient: legitimacy.
But what actually keeps this giant, complex machine lubricated and running smoothly so it doesn't just break down into a dictatorship? It all comes down to forced obedience versus voluntary compliance. Forced obedience is based on raw power, which is an inherently fragile instrument. It takes a massive, totally unsustainable expenditure of resources just to suppress dissent. But voluntary compliance? That is driven by legitimacy, the accepted rightfulness of a system, usually born from democratic processes. Legitimacy is the secret ingredient here. It transforms raw power into moral authority, which lets the state reallocate its energy from fighting its own citizens to providing actual beneficial public services.
There's actually a fantastic quote from our source material that hits the nail on the head here. It says, "When a government is viewed as legitimate, the essential services it provides are not seen as benevolent gifts from a ruler, but as the rightful fulfillment of a mandate." This is a profound paradigm shift. It turns basic human needs, like healthcare, education, and welfare, into legal obligations of the state. It actively reduces inequality, promotes social justice, and firmly reinforces that social contract so everyone actually benefits from the machinery.
Which leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought to wrap up this explainer. If government is this incredible, silent machinery saving us from absolute chaos and allowing us to prosper, what is your individual responsibility in making sure this machinery remains transparent, well-oiled, and above all, legitimate? We all have to act as the essential lubricant for this machine through our vigilance and our participation. So how will you engage to keep our society thriving and protect our collective prosperity? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope it completely changes the way you look at the invisible scaffolding all around us.